Are you ready to? So, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to SEDAtalk, or welcome if it's your first time. So this is fifth one in the series. So this is recorded. We'll end with a discussion which won't be recorded, and any links in the chat will be shared with the slides, which will go on to the SEDA website afterwards, along with the recording. So today's session, the theme is generative AI and looking for ethical and responsible ways forward. And we're delighted to welcome our guests, Louise Drum and Rosemary McWell, and we will introduce them more fully shortly. So we're going to start off with a quick update on the things that have happened, perhaps even overnight, which Peter Hartley is going to lead. So we'll have a quick look through that, and then we'll introduce our guests, as I say, more fully, and time for a discussion.
Right.
Okay, folks, welcome. This was where we left you last month's cliffhanger, and the big comment there is at the bottom, the AI genie is now really out of the bottle, a comment from John Norton. Okay.
But if you're kind of like locked, like you can only open up like one browser.
Stephen, could you mute?
Open up other tabs and stuff. Right.
We have a guest presenter here. Okay, yes. So a couple of days ago, we had the report from HEPI, which shows, quote, an explosive increase in the use of generative AI tools by students, described in the paragraph below as an unprecedented change. Okay. So a couple of things from the report. On the right-hand side, you've got a figure showing what students have used AI for. And on each of the indicators across there, you'll see that the 2025 figures are much bigger than the 2024 figures. Some of the main headlines on the left-hand side: 88% of students are now using generative AI for their assessments. And a particularly worrying thing at the bottom there, a growing digital divide in AI use. Okay, so that report's now available, and the link is on the slide there. So please pick up the slides and have a look at that report. Some very interesting developments. Okay.
I would add, when they say all students, there was only 1,000 interviewed.
Yeah, yes, and hopefully a representative sample, but we shall see. Okay, there's a quick rundown of the slides I'm going to talk you through. For each slide, I'll just introduce it very briefly, and you can pick up later because there's lots of links and lots of further information. But the first thing is AGI, automatic, the artificial general intelligence, where the computers can do virtually everything better than us. And the race is on. Okay, so this slide is from the India Times. This clip is from the India Times, and you may well ask, what was I looking in there for? And I'll tell you in a second. Just to give you a sense of the amount of investment that is going on worldwide. And we're now talking about billions of dollars being invested in Gen AI all over the world. Okay. And there's the Indian example. They've just announced a budget, which is the slide on the left-hand side, the picture on the left-hand side, announcing their budget with major investment in generative AI. And on the right-hand side there, you've got a extract from the news coverage, which tells you a bit more about their plans. And they're talking about centers of excellence now. Where have we heard that before? And if you look at the text in there, you'll see there's quite a resemblance between what they're trying to do and what they're aiming to do and our plans across here in the UK. Okay. DeepSeek, we mentioned DeepSeek, the Chinese large language model that took everybody by storm a month or so ago, wiped billions of dollars off the US stock market because it threatened the dominance of OpenAI, because they say we can do just the same for much cheaper. And it has become extremely popular in China. There's an example there on the right-hand side of the screen, but it's now being adopted in China across a whole range of applications. And the new model is coming out very, very shortly. Okay. Yeah. OpenAI have also, in response, announced their plans. And there you'll see two tweets from Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, on the left-hand side, saying rather nice things about this new model, GPT 4.5.
Ian,
However, it is
Albert
giant
is
and
meowing at me. I think
expensive.
you might want to go out.
Hello, we're getting
Claire, could you mute, please?
Sorry.
we're hearing a
you.
lot this morning. We're learning a lot about folks' whereabouts this morning. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the announcement that Sam Altman thinks, although it's big and expensive, it's a first model that feels like talking to a thoughtful person to me. And the right-hand side, he talks about 4.5, which is appearing imminently, and GPT-5, which is supposed to be the great leap forward, which is apparently coming at us next year. I have to say that the reviews I've seen so far of 4.5 are not that enthusiastic. So we shall see. Okay, so and my question for you, and you might want to pop an answer in the chat, what do you think will be the generative AI that we will all be rushing to at home by the end of this year? And if you want to put a quick response in the chat to that question, please do. What do you see yourself using over the next kind of 6 months that will be the dominant generative AI, both at home and perhaps at work? Pause for dramatic interlude for 10 seconds, and okay, Sue. Well, Amazon thinks it's going to be Alexa. And on this slide, you've got basically three links. On the left-hand side, you've got the link to the promo video, so you can go and have a look at that. In the middle, you've got an article reviewing it, the first article that we've seen reviewing it, where they're not too impressed. And apparently the formal launch has been put back a couple of days just to make sure that it's still working, or that it is working rather. And on the bottom right of your screen there, you'll see the interview with the CEO of Amazon. And so if you want to see what their plans are, because they have got 600 million users according to that interview, then have a look at that. And will we be now using Alexa as our dominant generative AI over the next few months? Well, I think it's particularly important, this, in the sense that won't this change people's perceptions and expectations about generative AI when it becomes just part of the backdrop? We shall see. Okay, Sue. And the other major development and change that the generative AI industry is promoting to us is this idea of agents. In other words, large language models that don't just respond to us, they don't just give us answers, and they don't just give us suggestions. They do things. They go and book that restaurant or book that flight or whatever it might be. And there's now a major push towards agents appearing all over in 2025. Okay. So back to the topic really for today, which is, so what about learning? And I thought that this was the real kind of important segue to our discussion. Very interesting article by Philippa Hardman, where she reviews 5 recent research studies, and she suggests at the top that the generic AI models, in other words, the very general ones, the very big ones, the OpenAIs, etc., are suboptimal for human learning and actually may have a detrimental effect. She qualifies that later on to say that you can counteract this detrimental effect if we take a pedagogy first. In other words, if we design it properly and use it properly, then it could be, she says, could be exponentially positive. Now, is that the future? Let me pass back to Sue and we'll start thinking about our discussion. Okay, Sue.
Thank you. Okay, so as I say, welcome to Dr. Louise Drum, who's an Associate Professor in Digital Education at Edinburgh Napier University, and Rosemary, who's an Associate Professor of Digital Pedagogy and Practice at Heriot-Watt University. So thank you very much for joining us. And these are the panel questions that we're going to have a look at and ask you, which we'll get started on. Do you want to show your slide first at this point, or do you want to come back to that at the end, Louise?
Perhaps we'll just come back to that at the end, if that's okay, Sue.
Okay, that's fine. So the first question then is, what are the key concerns which we need to face up to when we examine current applications of generative AI by staff and students?
I'm just going to respond to that immediately, but also just on the back of what Peter's just done. And I think one of the concerns that I have is the way that the narrative is being dominated. Education narrative is being dominated externally. I mean, 5 years ago, can you imagine sitting and listening to a rundown of the tech news that's happened in the last 4 weeks, or even overnight? It's quite an extraordinary turnaround that we're kind of chasing this kind of updates all the time. And of course, what's driving that, and the concern, I suppose, and that's where that last article, I think, looks quite interesting around that the education first narrative needs to be reclaimed. And I suppose the first thing I'd start off with is that we've been invited here today, but we're also speaking on behalf of two of our colleagues, Helen Beetham and Catherine Cronin, who we co-created our workshop with, and that's the resource we're going to share later on. We'll put links and so on in the chat. So one of the things that we were concerned about was the agency that we have, and I think that's a key concern in terms of when we're looking at the current applications, both for staff and for students, and where agency lies, where individual autonomy, whether it's academic autonomy or other things. And I think that even the stuff that's just coming up in the chat there around having Alexa in your house and so on, it's really kind of managing that. And that for me comes down to the human element, which is the emotions that we have to this situation, and managing as education developers, managing our own emotions, but also looking out for each other as well, and looking out for our colleagues. That's just about my immediate response to that. Maybe I'll pass over to Rosemary.
Yeah, I think maybe just to add two things, one of which coming out in the chat is that hyperbole. We're hearing this is the next big fix to absolutely everything. And there's I guess, a need to have a little bit of criticality of that. How do we fend off those big tech claims? And particularly when staff, are handling so many other things. How do you sift the good stuff from the hype, as it were? And I think the thing that underpinned everything that we did with our workshop and with our research is that promoting agency. It kind of feels like we don't have any choice here at the moment. Big tech is pushing AI into everything, whether you want it in your home or not, whether you want it in your teaching or not. So how do we maybe resist that, certainly question that? And that's quite a theme that's come out for us.
Thank you. Great answers there. So what do you think are the likely developments and applications and access to generative AI across HE, which we should be concerned about? Could you expand on that?
I think the first port of call here is around data and privacy and concerns around that. So it's not just about what's happening with our data, but what do we know about what's happening with our data, what's happening with student data. And I suppose the other piece to that, of course, is adhering to GDPR and so on, but also the integration. And I think this is where you can see it in the narrative in movement into agents and so on. But we know that there's aspects of artificial intelligence. I'm not talking about generative artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence that are increasingly integrated into enterprise systems, whether that's background processes around HR or customer relations or things like that within universities. So it's that kind of integration, and who's making the decisions around that. How much the vendors who are providing these pieces of software are making people aware of how those decisions are being made, and the with all technology, trying to understand what's going on in the box is quite tricky, but even more so with some of these things. And I think just being really mindful of actually the risks that institutions may be putting themselves in terms of legislation, but also security, data security as well, and also about that issue, which is are decisions being made, and making sure that there's absolutely a clear firewall between decisions that have human oversight and any decisions regarding humans that are being made at an automated level. And some of that, will come down to pushing back against some of the narratives around assessments and feedback and things like that.
And kind of underpinning that is a particular challenge rather than a concern for us as educational developers, is we need those decisions to be informed. And at the moment, there's still quite a lack of understanding across the sector about the differences. So we talk about generative AI, we talk about AI, we talk about AGI, and we talk about them almost interchangeably in some places. And it's that we need to actually understand AI as that overarching umbrella, and then these different aspects of AI. But it comes very blurry, particularly when we've got vendors selling us something that's just, it's got AI in it. And as Louise says, you can't open the box. So that's a particular challenge. One other thing to maybe add from the other side of this is that homogenization of HE, this potentially raises real challenges for us about fostering creativity and not ending up in that amorphous English speaking, white, northern developed perspective. Because of how generative AI has been developed, we are seeing that dominant narrative coming out, and we need to be able to question and challenge that, because we don't all want to be little clones of each other. We don't want to produce students that are clones of each other. We want to develop that creativity and that understanding of the world in its richness, not just one particular perspective.
Yeah, and I think I'd add to that just around what the integration of some of the things these tools might mean in our systems in terms of our relationships and our relationships with students and relationships with each other. And we have this, in entanglement with technology. They're just not tools that we pick up and put down, and there's neutrality to them. There isn't. As Rosemary indicates, there's inherent bias within some of those tools as well. But we also have to be careful that these tools don't insert themselves into the relationship that we have, particularly with students, but also with each other. And this is where another one of our kind of themes is around transparency and openness, and being open with each other about when we're using generative AI tools, and very much so when we're being open with students about when we're using generative AI tools, because the kind of the social contract we have with each other and with our students could be damaged, and that trust could be damaged if we aren't fully open about what we're using and why we're using it with everybody.
I totally agree, and there's lots of various different suggestions of how we should be telling students when or when not they can use it, and traffic light systems and etc. But what about staff? When is it okay for them to use it and not, etc. Which kind of leads on to the next question, really, is what are the implications, both short and long term, for educational development and for educational developers? What do we need to know so that we can help staff make those right decisions, have those right discussions, etc.
Well, I think Rosemary mentioned it earlier, there's this area where we need to be sort of clued up to a certain degree. And I suppose going back to the workshop that we ran and the resources that we've made available for people to run similar workshops was very much around exploring the space that people can respond and react in ways that's both a safe space, but also a creative space as well. Again, bringing that human agency back into it. And, for example, in our workshop, we had, we had provocations, and people could respond in any way, that including using generative AI tools if they wanted, or using other kind of physical materials or online digital creativity, or working with each other. So having that space, I think that was something that maybe coming to this group and speaking to you all about how we make spaces for each other to be able to have those open conversations, to respond and to think. And I think, that's the implications, because of everything moving very quickly, and the narrative around everything moving very quickly, having spaces for people to think through what the consequences are of perhaps using things, and knowing enough to be able to say, no, that's not actually appropriate at this point in time, or yes, it is appropriate to use generative AI in this particular activity with students or with each other, whatever. But there's that, we have to protect that space for people to be able to think through the consequences of those things, and again, not further fuel that idea of powerlessness that many of us may feel.
There's a very interesting discussion in the chat talking about students a growing number of students who might be refusing to use Gen AI on the grounds of all the issues that have been identified. And I'm wondering how does that strike a nerve with anyone? And what, and if we have designed our modules to depend on Gen AI, what do we then do? What are our obligations as a member of staff? Thoughts on that, Louise?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've come across this too. I've come across some very strong opinions from a moral perspective from certain students or from particular disciplines where they feel that it's not appropriate for a variety of reasons, whether it's environmental or the data or the creative work that it was trained on, or even a resistance to big tech in general. And I think this is where the rush to redesign everything and incorporate generative AI as a task and within assessments or within learning activities, it will, it is problematic for us. So in terms of what I say to my colleagues and students is that, if you choose not to use it, there are alternatives, and providing those alternatives and not letting generative AI just keep driving our curricula and our assessment design.
I think there's a question for us to be looking. We're moving towards that. We must have AI in our learning outcomes, so that we can then justify assessing. But we need to actually pause and say, is that appropriate? There is we must learn to use this technology in the same way as we use all technologies. But how much do we privilege this particular technology over other technologies that we use day to day? And because we're finding employers don't yet have the answers on what do they need in terms of the skills in this space, how much should we really be pushing AI as a learning outcome for our courses? So I think there's some interesting questions for us to explore. And as just one other thing on this is there's an interesting lens where AI is flagging up many things we're already working on. So we were already looking at how do we ensure more authentic assessments. Now, is an authentic assessment one that uses AI or one that doesn't? That's going to depend on your discipline and what you're trying to achieve. So it's that remembering as ed developers, there's a lot of things that we were doing already to enhance learning and teaching that AI has shone a light on, but actually hasn't changed overly much. So keep doing the good stuff that we're doing and then feed that AI piece into it.
That's great. Thank you for answering those questions. So we'll just move on to your slide now, and I'll let you talk through this from your website.
Sure, I'll just pull that up first now. So we ran a workshop in a conference, network learning conference last May, and it was I think Rosemary, if she hasn't done so already, will post the link in the chat to our abstract around that. And we ran it online, but we also ran it in person as well for people who, thank you, who were there in person too. So we had 90 minutes. We had a number of provocations. There were videos we played back that we prepared in advance. And as you can see, we created a Padlet for people to respond to each of the provocations by either working in groups or working individually, working on materials and so on. And what we've done is we've pulled together the resources that we used to make that workshop, including some of our slides, our videos, kind of how we set it up, how we invited people to participate, how we kind of wanted to ensure sort of a cultural acknowledgement of the generative AI tools that we may be using or others may be using, and also kind of cite that space as a safe space for people to express, in many ways, some of the kind of the emotions and feelings that were there. So you can see just an example, we had over nearly 40, I think, sort of artifacts that were created during that workshop, and a lot of interest and a really good discussion afterwards as well between people about how we're being kind of pulled in these different directions. We can see that there's, people are wanting to speak to, supporting colleagues. We had people there who were in similar roles to ours, but also, imperatives coming down from maybe hierarchies within our institutions saying that we should be we should be, you know, quote unquote, embracing and so on, and following a lot of the narrative that's possibly in the press, and indeed in you know, coming out from governments now, as Peter has highlighted as well. So so we were looking at it from a number of perspectives, including feminist perspectives, you know, exploitative labor perspectives, capital, and also open education practices and so on. So we had a loads of materials there. What our invitation is that if anybody wanted to take those materials, they're all Creative Commons. You know, you can take them either wholly or in part, run a similar workshop at your institution, or wider, further afield, use them in whatever way and adapt them for your context. We're very, very happy for people to do so. But I just thought I'd give you a flavor of what that Padlet looked like and the kind of responses we got. But you know, your mileage may vary. You might want to do different sorts of things. This would be very suitable, for example, for an institutional kind of breathing space, as we spoke about, for colleagues as well. And very much, there are no wrong answers here. There are no right answers. You know, you can approach this as and invite people to participate in this in whatever way. And then a lot of people just gave us that feedback to say they really appreciated that space to be able to think about it and think a little bit more creatively, even if they may not be call themselves creative, artistic, but just engage with some of the materials in a way that sort of generates at human scale and human speed ideas and thoughts and responses.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'll stop sharing there and see if there's any questions from anybody. Is there anything you want to respond to in the